Perfect. 3.1 is on something called congruent figures. The rest of chapter 3 will be on congruent triangles, but we start off in section 1. We don't just focus in on congruent triangles. We figure that we can talk about congruent polygons. Anything like a quadrilateral is congruent to a quadrilateral. They actually have a symbol that you may or may not have seen. It looks just like this. It's an equal sign with a small wave on top. When you see this symbol that has an equal sign with a little wavy sign on top, that means congruent. Instead of writing the word congruent, you can write the symbol congruent. I am okay with that. You'll be speaking mathematics to me when you write this symbol, and I will know that you mean congruent. And if you ever use this, it means the same size and the same shape. It actually even means, if you take off that top sign, it means that they're equal in measure. But sometimes we can just say the same size and the same shape. If you ever have congruent polygons, they have congruent corresponding parts. What that means is if I know this shape here is exactly or congruent to that shape there, here's how you would write that. Polygon ABCD is congruent to polygon FGHI. This little thing right here is called a congruence statement. They are written in matching order, meaning that angle A is congruent to angle F. That this angle here is exactly the same as that one there if they're the same shape. If they're the same shape and same size, they should match up. B should match up with angle G, C should match up with angle H, D should match up with angle I, and this side length would be the same as this side length, and so on. That's what that means. They have corresponding, matching parts. They're in order on purpose. If this says it goes this way, it matches. It has to match up with what's going on over there. If it doesn't, then they wouldn't be congruent. Okay? So, you're going to have some problems in your worksheet like this, which says, what's angle 1? What is the measure of angle 2? So if you want to know what angle 1 is, angle B, that's the same as this letter over here in this one. So if you know what this angle's measurement is, you should know what this angle's measurement is. If you know what angle 1's measurement is, say the number that it's worth, the value that it's worth out loud. 95. If you said 95, you are correct. Let me write that in red. If you know the measurement for angle 2, otherwise known as angle C, what's its measurement? Say its measurement out loud, please. 60 degrees. You are correct. So that is the start of your questions. Fairly simple. A lot of you will like this kind of math because it's easy. It's a lot of common sense. But you may not get confused when it says write the congruent statement in two other ways. What that means is these two are congruent to each other, but I have to write it in matching order. So if you were to start by saying CDAB, let's just write that, polygon CDAB is congruent to. If I choose to start with the letter C over here, and then I go to the letter D, then I go to the letter A, then I go to the letter B, then its congruent statement has to match. Otherwise, it is not correct. C is the same as which letter? What's the first letter that I need to write in the congruent statement? And the second letter should be? And the third letter should be? And the last letter should be? That is another way to write the same congruent statement. That is one other way. There's a lot of different possible answers. You can even start with the one on the right. If you said G and you went this way, F, I, H. If you went G, F, I, H is congruent to, then everything else has to match. What matches with G? What's the first letter that has to match with this? I agree. The second letter that has to match is? The third letter that has to match is? And the last letter that has to match? That's one bad C right there. Perfect. Those are just two possible answers. If you came up with other ones, as long as they matched, you would be correct. Fairly simple, right? And if there's three letters, the three letters have to match. Now, we've been doing these. Some of you have been doing it with the picture. You do not have to have a picture if you have the congruent statement. Matter of fact, in our notes, I had you write down that congruent statements eliminate the need for a picture. For example, this is number 9 on your worksheet. It says, given polygon FOUR is congruent to polygon MANY. List each of the following 4 pairs of congruent sides. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to envision that they have a statement that matches up with another 2 shapes. And if I think about the sides of this is AB, and the side of this is BC, and the side of this is CD, and the side of this is DA, then you're going to know the sides of these 2 objects without even having to draw a picture. For example, segment FO, that's why there's a bar on top. That's a side. This side is congruent to, FO is congruent to, I bet you guys know what 2 letters match up on this side. And then what goes on top is a segment bar. Segment MA. That's how you tell me you know you're putting a segment bar, is you would say segment MA. That's 1 pair of sides that match up. You have a question?
Oh, no.
Okay. Let's pick another side that matches up. How about the letters or the side OU? I bet you know that segment OU is congruent to something. If you know the 2 letters that segment OU is congruent to, say them out loud, please. Right. Segment AN. When you say the word segment, you're telling me there's a bar on top. When you write it with a bar on top, you are writing it correctly. And that is 2 pairs. There's 3 pairs and 4 pairs. Can we go a little bit faster? Let's try UR and then probably FR or RF, same thing. Segment UR is congruent to which segment? Segment NY. And the last one, segment FR is congruent to segment MY, or YM is the same thing. Usually we're going to make it match. 4 pairs of congruent sides. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. It's not hard. Didn't even have to draw a picture. If are all their sides and angles congruent? If their angles are congruent, if their sides are congruent, then they are congruent figures. You're going to have to determine on some of these problems on this worksheet, are these 2 objects congruent? Can you conclude that the figures are congruent? Justify your answer. Is this triangle SRT, is it congruent to triangle PRQ? Do not assume that they're congruent. This should be considered a question mark. Are they congruent? Number 10, can you conclude that they are congruent? Well, let's look. Are all their angles the same? This angle is the same as that angle, yeah? Vertical angles are the same. These angles are going to be the same as each other. Do I know if side ST is congruent to side QP? Does it say anywhere that those are equal in measure? Does it say that they're equal anywhere? Do you have any congruent marks? You do not. That does not say, let me just put it like this. I don't know how long that is. I don't know how long that is. I don't know how long this is. I don't know how long that is. If they're congruent, you might see something that looks like a line and a line. Those are congruency marks. If they do not have congruency marks, you cannot assume that they are congruent. Are all the sides and all the angles congruent in this picture? We have 2 angles in both triangles, but other than that, I can't say that they are congruent. So I'm going to say no on number 10. I cannot conclude that the figures are congruent. I only know 2 angles are congruent. That's it. Not all the angles and not all the sides. The only way we can tell if 2 objects are congruent right now is if all the angles and all the sides are congruent, and I only know the 2 angles are congruent. Which brings me to my last example. My last example is number 17. Number 17 on your worksheet says this: triangle FGH is congruent to triangle QRS. So it starts off with something called a congruence statement. There's your congruence statement. Find the measures of the given angles or the lengths of the given sides. If this triangle is congruent to this triangle, then you should know that their parts are also congruent. So that tells me that GH should be congruent to which 2 letters in this congruency statement? What does that mean? That means that this distance here should be equal to this distance there. Then I can write an equation. 3x minus 2 should be equal to x plus 6. We're going to figure out what x is. We'll do the opposite. Since I'm going to the opposite side, I'm going to subtract an x. Three x minus 1x is 2x. X minus x is 0. I'm going to do the opposite of subtracting 2. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And then my goal is to turn all of you into A students. The B students will stop right here. The B students will stop right here because they are going to forget to do something. It says find the measures of the given angles or the lengths of the given sides. Does it say figure out what x is? No. This is not your final answer. This is how you're going to get to your final answer. To find the length of the given side, how long is RS? RS is this plus 4, or 4 plus 6. How long is RS? 10 units long. You could have figured that out by plugging the 4 in here as well. It would get the same distance if they're congruent, right? So I'm going to say that GH is also 10. And the lengths of the given sides we figured out. The A students will plug the X back in, and don't forget when you're doing that. I'm going to stop your notes right there.